Today, I am proud to present to you a panel and presentation of Face Off, Overcoming Barriers. Today, our writers are going to be talking about how they create characters who summon the courage to overcome obstacles, living the kind of lives to which they aspire. Our moderator for today is Matt de la Peña, who grew up in California, played basketball at University of Pacific, and from there studied creative writing at San Diego State. His first novel, Ball Don't Lie, he wrote while living in Los Angeles, and he later collaborated on the script for the film version. He has two more novels, Mexican White Boy and We Were Here, and has also published short fiction in various literary journals, including Pacific Review, George Mason Review, and Allegheny Literary Review. He's also in the anthology Does This Book Make Me Look Fat? He currently lives in Brooklyn and teaches creative writing at New York University. David Almond is the 2010 winner of the most prestigious award, the Hans Christian Andersen Award for Excellence in Fiction for Young People. He has also twice won the Whitbread Children's Book Award. His first novel, Skellig, also won a Carnegie Medal, while his second work, Kit's Wilderness, won the Smarties Award, Silver Medal, and was shortlisted for the Guardian Award. His book, The Fire Eaters, won the Whitbread and the Smarties Gold Award. Is that actually a big golden Smartie?
It should be, shouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, you know. Those are like M&Ms. I'm like, that's really the jackpot. And was shortlisted for the Carnegie Medal. And his latest novel, Clay, again, shortlisted for the Costa Children's Book Award and the Carnegie Medal. He was raised in the United Kingdom, and after studying English and American literature, he had a wide variety of jobs: porter, postman, teacher, editor, and even spent a year and a half on a commune where he focused on writing. His many short stories have been published in magazines and anthologies, as well as made for broadcast on radio. And David Almond's original plays and adaptations of his own work for the stage have appeared at the Young Vic and the Edinburgh Fringe. That includes an operatic version of Skellig, but it's in 2011 that New Yorkers and all Americans will be able to enjoy a play version of Skellig, which will be coming to the New Victory Theater in New York. Alina Bronsky was born in Ekaterinburg, Russia in 1978. She spent her childhood on the Asian side of the Ural Mountains and her youth in Marburg and Darmstadt. After dropping out of medical school, she worked as a copywriter in an ad agency and as a journalist for a daily newspaper. Broken Glass Park, her debut novel, was nominated for the prestigious Bachmann Prize. She now lives in Frankfurt, Germany. Janne Teller has written several award-winning and best-selling novels, as well as numerous essays, short stories, and children's fiction. Her literature has been translated into more than 13 languages. Her novels for adults include the Nordic saga Odin's Island, The Trampling Cat, and most recently, Come. Her first novel for young adults is the internationally acclaimed Nothing. She's lived all around the world, but now she lives in New York. Smart choice. Tommy Wieringa has written works including the novels All About Tristan, which won the Halloween Prize. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Woohoo! In 2002, and Joe Speedboat, which was his breakthrough and won the Broadwick Prize in 2006. His travel stories have been collected in the volume I Was Never in Isfahan. Tommy Wieringa writes columns on art and literature for the Dutch NRC Handelsblad daily newspaper. His latest novel, Caesarion, is a finalist for the AKO Literature Prize 2009. We'd also like to thank our interpreter for today, Claudia Steinberg. She's joining She's joining Alina Bronsky on stage today. Welcome to all of our panelists.
So I think we're all going to start by reading a selection. Is that right? So who wants to start? Should we just start on this end? Mrs. Bronsky, can we start with you? Do you want to read a selection of your work?
Yes, I would like to. Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I would like to start with a short passage from the beginning of my book, Broken Glass Park. Sometimes I think I'm the only one in our neighborhood with any worthwhile dreams. I have two, and there is no reason to be ashamed of either one. I want to kill Vadim, and I want to write a book about my mother. I already have a title, The Story of an Idiotic, Red-Headed Woman who would still be alive if only she had listened to her smart oldest daughter. Or maybe that's more of a subtitle, but I have plenty of time to figure it out, because I haven't started writing yet. Well, this is Tasha Nyman, the heroine of my novel, speaking, and it's her story I told in my book. She's 17 years old, and she survived a terrible tragedy. She lost her mother, and the book tells how she tries to survive and how she succeeds.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Tommy, you wanna?
Was that it? You finished?
Yes. Now it's your turn.
What a short reading. You sure you don't want to do some more?
I'd like to listen to yours, actually.
Oh, you're very friendly. Let's see, this is from the novel Joe Speedboat. It is about a boy who's in a wheelchair and he's not actually in a wheelchair, actually, I'm sorry. This is before he has his accident, and this tells you how he ended up being disabled. My thoughts went back before the years I'd met Joe Speedboat, the hero of the novel, before I'd left the world behind for 220 days when he was in a coma. So many questions back then, so many questions that it made me dizzy. There had to be more to it than this, I was sure of it. People couldn't really be content to live and die the way they did. Some secret was being kept from me, something they knew but weren't telling, something 1,000 times more real than this. Wondering why, they say, is the start of all philosophy. For me it was the start of a kind of hell. No whys about it, Pa would say, that's just the way it is. And when I kept asking, he would smack me up against the side of the head. He was the wrong person to ask, in other words, but that didn't mean there was no answer. I wasn't too ignorant to know ignorance when I saw it. So I waited. Somewhere a door would open, someone would explain how it went, and until then I would keep my eyes wide open and keep asking why. And the answer didn't come. I'd expected a lot from high school, biology, history, literature. That was where it was all going to happen. It had to be buried somewhere inside that pile of books I lugged around each day. But the books spoke with the voices of teachers, or the teachers spoke with the voices of books. How that worked was never quite clear to me. They taught me skills, but provided no answers. Until then, my why had always been referred on. But this, for the time being, was where the buck stopped. This was where I was going to stay for the next 5 years. These same mouths would speak to me the whole time, and, to my horror and dismay, I discovered that my question wasn't particularly popular here either. Things were what they were, and it didn't do to go poking around it too much. Just like Pa said. I caught a glimmer of an abysmal truth. The people here wanted to pass the time as comfortably as possible, without having to deal with questions that couldn't be answered with a simple yes, no, or I don't know. No one around me was doing anything except the best imitation they could of what they'd seen other people do before. Parents imitated their parents, kindergarten teachers other kindergarten teachers, pupils other pupils, and clergymen and educators each other and their books. The only variation was in what they forgot to imitate. That's a key sentence. None of them knew the way. Rank amateurism was all it was. And I lay awake at night, my eyes wide open, more afraid of the things that weren't there than of the things that were. At church, I sat in the back pew. No, let's skip it, yeah. Looking back on it, I think I wasn't even searching for the truth or anything, just for something that shed a little light, and that's where the hero Joe Speedboat comes in, something that sheds a little light. My first year of high school was one huge disaster. It made me sick. Everywhere I looked I saw mediocrity and submissiveness, and an innocence that ruined everything, because it meant that no one could really help it. If we were, in fact, the measure of all things, what hope was there of redemption? By the end of my second year I was furious. A long vacation followed, and I watched July go by. Then August came, and I waited for nothing. I lay on my back in the tall grass that was already turning yellow. The dryness rustled, little bugs crawled over my arms and legs. I let them. The dryness, somewhere I heard the pounding of a galloping horse. The corn was still half high, and the rust-brown sorrel stuck out above it. I looked up at this blank sky, a lovely blue and all, but otherwise nothing. Growling monotonously, a little plane crossed the void. At the edges of my vision, the woolly thistles were bursting their buds, butterflies fluttered aimlessly, and I had the feeling I was sinking. I sank to a dark and quiet place. It was a day for cyclone mowers. I must have heard it, the tractor pulling the snapping blades, cutting through grass and flowers. Whack, whack, whack. No sleep so deep but that you would not hear that. Who could fail to hear the roar of a 190 horsepower John Deere? Who would lie down and sleep in the grass at mowing time? Who would do something like that? Then you've got only yourself to blame. You're right, all of you. Who would lie down in the grass at mowing time?
Okay. Great book, by the way. I was just on a plane from California to New York. I flew the red eye and I read that book. So I should have been sleeping and it kept me up. And this is my first time ever being a quote-unquote ringleader or moderator, so if I mess up, don't get mad at me. And this is, I'm going to read 2 pages from my newest book called We Were Here. It came out in October. And it's a story of a guy who commits a awful, unthinkable crime, and he's sentenced to a year in a group home, and this is his journal during the year. May 13th. Here's the thing. I was probably going to write a book when I got older anyways, about what it's like growing up on the levee in Stockton, where every other person you meet has missing teeth or is leaning against a liquor store wall begging for change to buy beer. Or maybe it'd be about my dad dying in the stupid war and how at the funeral they gave my mom some cheap medal and a folded flag and shot a bunch of rifles at the clouds. Or maybe the book would be something about me and my brother Diego, how we hang mostly by ourselves, pulling corroded-looking fish out of the murky levee water and throwing them back. How sometimes when Moms falls asleep in front of the TV, we'll sneak out of the apartment and walk around the neighborhood looking into other people's windows, watching them sleep. That's the weirdest thing, by the way, that every person you come across lays down in a bed under the covers and closes their eyes at night. For some reason it makes people seem so much less real when I look at them. Anyways, at first I was worried standing there next to the hunchback old man they gave me for a lawyer, both of us waiting for the judge to make his verdict. I thought maybe they'd put me away for a grip of years because of what I did. But then I thought real hard about it. I squinted my eyes up and concentrated with my whole mind. That's something you don't know about me. I can sometimes make stuff happen just by thinking about it. I try not to do it too much because my head mostly gets stuck on bad stuff. But this time something good actually happened. The judge only gave me a year in a group home, said I had to write in a journal so some counselor could try to figure out how I think. He didn't know I was probably going to write a book anyway, or that it's hard as hell being at home these days after what happened. So when he gave out my sentence, it was almost like he didn't give me a sentence at all. I told my moms the same thing when we were walking out of the courtroom together. I said, "Yo, Ma, this isn't so bad, right? I thought these people would lock me up and throw away the key." She didn't say anything back, though. Didn't look at me either. Matter of fact, she didn't look at me all the way up until the day they had to drive me to juvenile hall, drop me off at the gate where 2 big beefy white guards were waiting to escort me into the building. And even then she just barely glanced at me for a split second, and we didn't hug or anything. Her face seemed plain, like it would on any other day. I tried to look at her real good as we stood there. I knew I wasn't going to see her for a while. Her skin was so much whiter than mine, and her eyes were big and blue, and she was wearing those fake diamond earrings she always wears that sparkle when the sun hits them at a certain angle. Her blonde hair all pulled back in a ponytail. For some reason it hit me hard right then, as one of the guards took me by the arm and started leading me away. How pretty my mom is. For real, it's like someone's picture you see in a magazine laying around the dentist's office or on a TV show, and she's actually my mom. I looked over my shoulder as they walked me through the gate, but she still wasn't looking at me. It's okay though. I understood why. It's 'cause of what I did. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to read from this book called Nothing. Okay, and please say if I don't speak loud enough. I know that it's a fault of mine. You know, when you normally just sit and write, it's always a little difficult to come out and talk. And so I'm reading from the beginning of this book. Pierre Anton left school the day he realized that nothing was worth doing because nothing meant anything anyway. The rest of us stayed on. And although the teachers had a job on their hands, tidying up after Pierre Anton in the classroom, as well as in our heads, part of Pierre Anton remained stuck inside of us. Maybe that was why it all turned out the way it did. It was the second week of August. The sun was heavy, making us slow and irritable. The tarmac caught on the soles of our sneakers, and apples and pears were just ripe enough to lie snugly in the hand, the perfect missiles. We looked neither left nor right. It was the first day of school after summer vacation. The classroom smelled of detergent and weeks of emptiness. The windows reflected clear and bright, and the blackboard was yet to be blanketed with chalk dust. The desks stood 2 by 2 in rows, as straight as hospital corridors, as they did only on this one day of the year. Class 7A. We found our seats without caring to shake any familiarity into the orderliness. There's a time for everything. Better things, jumbled things, but not today. Mr. Eskilsson bid us welcome with the same joke he made every year. Take joy in this day, children, he said. There would be no such thing as vacation were it not for such a thing as school. We laughed, not because it was funny, but because him saying it was. It was then that Pierre Anton stood up. Nothing matters, he announced. I've known that for a long time. So nothing's worth doing. I just realized that. Calm and collected, he bent down and put everything he had just taken out back into his bag. He nodded goodbye with a disinterested look and left the classroom without closing the door behind him. The door smiled. It was the first time I had seen it do that. Pierre Anton left the door ajar like a grinning abyss that would swallow me up into the outside with him, if only I let myself go. Smiling at whom? At me, at us. I looked around the class. The uncomfortable silence told me the others had felt it too. We were supposed to amount to something. Something was the same as someone. And even if nobody ever said so out loud, it was hardly left unspoken either. It was just in the air, or in the time, or in the fence surrounding the school, or in our pillows, or in the soft toys, that after having served us so loyally, had now been unjustly discarded and left to gather dust in attics or basement. I hadn't known. Pierre Anton's smiling door told me. I still didn't know with my mind, but all the same I knew. All of a sudden I was scared. Scared of Pierre Anton. Scared, more scared, most scared. And I'll stop here. Maybe I should just say this is where the children set out to try to prove to Pierre Anton that something matters.
I write, most of my books look like that with lots of text in, but I just love writing in all kinds of different forms, and for the last couple of years I've done collaborations with artists. I love the way words and pictures can work together on a page, and we kind of assume that pictures are just for very young kids, but I think that's rubbish actually, and I think that it's a kind of challenge, but also a kind of interesting storytelling challenge to write a book which has pictures in for older people. It also contains a story by a child who can't write. I'm really interested in that as well, you know, how we make language work and how we turn it into stories. So this book's called The Savage, and the artist is an astonishing artist called Dave McKean, who's just a fantastic, so he did brilliant work. It starts with a sentence that could start any story. You won't believe this, but it's true. I wrote a story called The Savage, about a savage kid that lived under the ruined chapel in Burgess Woods, and the kid came to life in the real world. I wrote it soon after my dad died. There was a counsellor at school called Mrs. Malloy that kept taking me out to lessons and telling me to write my thoughts and feelings down. She said she wanted me to explore my grief and start to move forward. I did try for a while, but it just seemed stupid, and it even made me feel worse. So one day I ripped up all that stuff about myself. I got an old notebook and I started scribbling The Savage. Here's the first bit of it, and I know the spelling isn't brilliant, but I was younger then. There was a wild kid living in Burgess Woods, I wrote. He had no family and he had no pals and he didn't know where he'd come from and he couldn't talk and he lived on berries and roots and rabbits and stuff like old pies that he pinched from the bins at the back of Greenacres Rest Home. He lived in a cave under the ruined chapel. His weapons were old kitchen knives and forks and an axe that he nicked from Frankie Finnegan's allotment. If anybody ever seen him, he chased them and caught them and killed them and ate them and chucked their bones down an ancient pit shaft. He was savage. He was truly wild. Once I started writing the story down, it was like I couldn't stop, which was strange for me. I'd never been one for stories. I couldn't stand all that stuff about wizards and fairies and once upon a time, and they all lived happily ever after. That's not what life's like. Me, I wanted blood and guts and adventures, so that's what I wrote. I said it all in our little town of Saltwell. I didn't show The Savage to Mrs. Malloy. I didn't show it to anybody. It was my kind of story, just for myself. My name's Blue Baker, by the way. I live down Aiden's Lane at the edge of town with my mum and my little sister Jess. We're okay now, but we weren't back then. We'd been an ordinary happy family, not a care in the world. Then without any warning, everything changed. One day Dad was there with the rest of us. The next day his heart stopped and he wasn't. I won't go into all the stuff about the funeral and everything, because it was just a blank nightmare. And I won't try to say how we all felt, because no matter what the Mrs. Malloys of the world say, there's no way you can get your feelings down properly on paper. I'll just say it was all absolutely horrible. And I'm sorry about the swearing, but if you can't swear about something like this, what's the use of swearing at all? Anyway, Mum said it was worst for me. She said she'd had my dad for a dozen years or more, so she had lots of happy memories. And Jess was that young, she'd never really remember him. But me, I'd always remember and wondered what I'd missed. And I'd always feel the loss of never getting really to know him. Lads need their dads to grow up properly, she said. I knew it was true, but I tried to be strong. And I said as soon as I could I'd go out and get a job and look after us all. She laughed and said, "Will you know? What kind of job?" I didn't have a clue, of course. "One that'll get me loads of dosh," I said. "I'll be a pop singer." And I started yelling out a pop song. "Or a footballer." And I dribbled a ball of paper through the kitchen. I rolled my sleeves up and started shadowboxing in the living room. "Or a boxer." I showed how big the muscles on my arms were getting. Not very big at all. And Jess giggled, and Mum felt them, and admired them, and she cuddled me. "Just be a lad, son," she said. "That's all you need to be for now." And we held each other tight. Right from the start, I tried not to cry. I tried to put on a real tough front. The thing is, I've never really been one of the hard lads. I know how to swagger about when I need to, like most lads do, but like most of us, I'm just dead soft inside. But there are some proper hard lads out there, and they're the ones to keep away from. Lads like Hopper. Hopper, what can I say about him? What is it about some kids? Why do they want to make life so tough for other kids? Whatever it is, Hopper was one of them. He was bigger than me and a couple of years older than me. He lived not too far away. He had a homemade tattoo of a skull on his brow, and love and hate tattooed onto his knuckles. He walked around smoking and sneering and spitting and swearing. He'd always picked on me as far back as I remember. There was nothing special about that. He picked on loads of kids, especially the scrawny ones, and there was nothing really dangerous about it. He just called me names, rat-face, dog breath, stupid stuff like that, and he lurched into me when I walked past, and sometimes spit out the side of his mouth. I told Dad about it a couple of times. He said he wasn't surprised. "I know it's hard, son," he said, "but there's always been kids like Hopper, and there always will be." I flexed my muscles. I punched the air. Sometimes, I said, I wish I could smash his face in. Kapow!
I just wanted to ask a little question, a mini questionnaire of the audience. Just a show of hands. How many of you have ever found yourself in a situation that was so dire, it was just so bad, and you had no power to change it? How many of you have ever found yourself in that situation? Now, how many of you put yourselves in that situation that was so dire and be honest. And how many of you have stood by either as a friend or as a warner or as a bystander when someone else took that step and got themselves into a situation that was way over their heads? Okay, so you guys have seen some stuff here. So your audience understands about characters who find themselves in outrageous situations, and you all look like you've survived to some extent. So let's call this a survivors meeting.
Well, I think that's interesting. I actually want to turn and ask one specific question to each member of the panel, and then I'm gonna just ask more general questions. But speaking of those tough situations, Alina, in your novel, there's a lot of violence involving women, and I just wanted to ask you, as a female author, is it difficult to write those scenes? Are you drawn to those scenes for a specific reason?
Well, I actually didn't have any choice while writing, because it was just the story of my heroine, and I had to write it down. I couldn't say it's too bad, it's too difficult for me to write it down, so I just did it. But it's a good question, actually. If you start to read things you wrote, you may be a bit astonished or deeply touched by the things. So you start to see them with different eyes, and then, well, it's sort of a really strange feeling.
Yeah. And you know, I think there's one in particular moment where, and this is kind of outside of the question I just asked, but you have this character Volker, and everybody wants to love Volker, but you give him this one moment of complexity where he basically does something that the audience doesn't want him to do, and he tries to seduce the heroine. And I think it's interesting as an author, because you have to sometimes do these things to your characters that maybe you don't want to do because you like him. Was that a challenge?
I think it was just, it was completely different, because I see the heroes of my novel not as my heroes. They are really real persons for me, and they do things which they want to do, not the things I want them to do. So Volker is, yes, he not only tries to seduce, he also tries to resist, and then he succeeds. So he's still, I think he's a wonderful man still, yes.
Okay. Tommy, first of all, I love the passage that you picked out to read, but you have this character who records daily events, and what do you think, what does that mean to you as the writer? What's he doing there?
Well, yeah, you could read Joe Speedboat as the diary of this young boy, but I had this character Joe Speedboat, and I really needed something else, somebody who was immobile next to a vibrant character like Joe Speedboat is. So I thought of a boy in a wheelchair, which was actually a lucky shot, but he's numb, and he's also a spastic, so even writing is not so easy for him. So he writes his diaries, but every now and then his pens fly out of his hands like that, and then he has to get another one. But writing diaries, as I recall, I started writing diaries when I was 11. I actually spent the first 18 years of my life as a girl. I had long hair, and well, there were people who actually, older men who actually whistled at me because I was quite a beautiful girl as well. Yes, and because I was a girl, I wrote diaries. I mean, that's what you do. And I had these, and then I burned incense. You understand? And I had a little golden lock on my diary, and I wore the golden thing around my neck. So it was an interesting period, but writing diaries actually gave me a sort of an understanding in this wild turbulence that life is at the time that you grow up. there was only one thing that actually gave me some kind of hope, and that was this recreation of the recreation of life itself in written form, and in writing I gained a little understanding of things that were going on. I mean, that's quite a boring answer, but it did. And I think for a boy in a wheelchair who's unable to speak, this is the only way that I could give him a voice. So this is the only way he can express himself. Yeah.
And he doesn't have the long hair anymore, but he's still worthy of a whistle, I think, right? And, you know, Jan, this book, Nothing. So you have this character, Pierre, who's saying that the world means nothing and why should we do anything? And I really agree with him. And so I was wondering if, you know, as the writer, I mean, how much do you agree with his premise? And was, you know, like what percentage of you feels that way?
I mean, the thing was, when I wrote this book, which is, 10 years ago, I wrote the original version in Denmark, even though it just came out here now. I really did feel like Pierre Anton. This is not a book in any way that's written like, here, now I can tell you what's the meaning of life. It's like, wow, here I'm searching for what the heck are we here for? Because for me, everything was just dark at that moment. I had lived, I've been constantly moving around a lot, and I'd lived in Africa for a number of years and working in Mozambique, in a war situation, and I'd seen so much gruesomeness, and it was really difficult to pick up also after that. And so it was like, when I started writing this book, I normally write for adults, but I got those first 4 lines of Pierre Anton's in my head that, nothing matters, so why is it worth doing something? And suddenly it was like I had this boy in me, in my head, and I had to follow him. And evidently, when he starts, he climbs this plum tree and he starts shouting at the other kids things like, the earth is 4.6 billion years old and you live maximum to 100, it's not worth the bother. Well, I can't contradict him. And the thing is, the other kids, if they knew the answers or they knew the meaning for sure, they wouldn't set out on the quest for the meaning of life. It's their doubt, this thing that they get scared, that sets off this whole thing. So when I wrote the book, I was like both Pierre Anton and the other kids, and I really wanted to prove Pierre Anton wrong. And I didn't know how to do it, and of course things go very wrong in the book, and I hope nobody would ever do it like do it here. But really it was my own attempt at fighting with myself. I think we probably all have a Pierre Anton in our head, and he's just louder at some points than at other points. I still have him, but the interesting thing for me was what happened when I'd written the book was somehow I had become friends with him. Before, all those questions that I had no answers for, it was like, a dark room that I almost didn't dare enter, because if I started thinking about it, I would just stay in bed all day and never get out. And after having written it, it was a bit like, well, I don't know where the sky ends. I don't know why I'm sitting here, but I know I'm here. And it's okay, it's enough. And I better make something out of just that. So I became friends with all of Pierre Anton's questions, though I still don't have the answers. I mean, I can't prove him wrong, but I just know there's something else. And well, so it's my own quest, this book.
I think that's interesting, because I think we do all have a Pierre in our head. And then David, I was so interested in what you just said about you have this book with illustrations, and it's not necessarily a picture book, but I saw that you have also written a picture book. You've written plays. What do you enjoy about working in different forms? What is it, a freedom for you?
Yeah, I think it is just the sense of freedom. I mean, I've always written ever since I was a little kid, and when I was a little boy, I used to write stories down in paper and stitch them together into books, and I've just kept on doing that. And one of the liberating things about writing for young people, I think, is that you are given the opportunity to write in lots of different forms. If you go into a young people's book department, you'll find books in all kinds of manner and means of writing. Different points of view, different voices, experimentation with what pages look like, and they're all just ways of telling stories, of using language to express things. And I think one of the great things about being a writer of whatever kind is just, you know, the moments when you're playing around with words, because I think writing is like playing, and I think we kind of forget that at our peril. You know, we're told, and we all know, that writing is serious and can be very difficult and so solemn, but it's also a kind of effervescent thing. And if you just scribble around and play with words on paper, the words themselves and the objects that you begin to describe will begin to create stories for you. And that sounds like that's kind of balmy, but you know, I think we all know that that's true, don't we? You know, that words themselves and the world itself just allows stories to kind of come into existence. So in many ways, all my books are about the same kind of things, but you know, and basically they're about storytelling, and that's what I love to do, and I love to use language. And I think, you know, I speak to young people quite a lot, and I think it's really important to keep on saying, well, you know, writing is like playing. Writing is like playing, and you really have to remember that.
Okay, well, and then here's a more general question for the panel. So answer this, by the way, you know, when I'm a panelist and there's a moderator asking silly questions, I'm like, oh, what is this stupid question I have to answer? So if they're stupid, you can just say whatever you want, all right? You know, as a writer myself, I'm always interested in what comes first, the characters or the plot / concept. Because I think of all the books, there's very much a heavy theme, a heavy subject matter. So what comes first for you guys? Is it the characters, or is it the setting and the plot and the concept? Maybe I'll start over here.
Yes.
Start over there first.
Should we do it? Oh. All right, you're on.
It comes in different ways, and it often does come from that process of playing that I say. So, you know, I use a lot of notebooks and scribble, and you kind of look for things that begin to emerge. Or sometimes, you know, you'll be walking along the streets and just the sentence comes into your head. And when a sentence or an image comes into your head that seems to be the right one, it comes with a kind of fizz about it, a kind of energy. And you take the thing that has lots of energy and you begin to work around that. And it doesn't come for me from plotting and planning. You know, I remember as a kid being told, if you're going to write a story, before you even set out to write the story, you've got to say, well, this is going to happen at the beginning, this is going to happen in the middle, and this is going to happen at the end. And I remember trying to do that, and I thought, but it doesn't happen. You know, I write the middle, and then I go right at the beginning, I get the middle, it starts doing different things. And I think that's just your imagination beginning to work. And I think you have to allow your imagination to work in its own way and allow it to go off on tracks that you don't understand yourself. And I think that's important as well. Sometimes you have to write about things that you really haven't got a clue what you're writing about.
I do that all the time.
I know.
Yeah, I think it also differs. I mean, for me, all my books are very different, and as you say, I normally write more for adult, but you know, I write a lot to learn about things I don't understand anything about. And I think fiction offers such an opportunity, you know, that I mean, if you're truthful to your characters and you follow what would this person do in this situation, you somehow learn something about how people act. And I have something that preoccupies me, a subject, like with Nothing. It was really, you know, what is the meaning of us here? But I had no idea how to go about it. And it was a great surprise for myself to write this for young adults, because I would think, oh, you have to write philosophically and quote this and that, a big thinker. And then I know the big questions in life are actually really simple. A 5-year-old can ask them, where does the sky stop? And becoming like, you know, a 15-year-old again, and where you take away all your preconceived notions about life. What you think is right or not, and the choices you made, you try to prove yourself right in doing. You say you're just starting all over again. It really allowed me to follow these kids and go very, very far with the questions. And for me, this book becomes very, very gruesome, and I'm someone who can't even see detective stories in TV without closing my eyes or going out. And so people who know me are very shocked that I could write something that becomes as gruesome as this. But it's again, you have to be truthful to your characters. And once the story had started, there was for me no way to end. I had to go all the way. But yeah, basically, it was Pierre Anton and then his friends. They were living in my head. Yeah.
And you know, this is such a great question that I think I'm going to jump in real quick too. You know, I bet there are some people out there that are actually quiet, like closet writers, because that's how I was when I was young. I never told anybody. And I just want to say that I have this new belief that there's this idea that some people are just born to write, and I would just disagree with that. And I think all of us probably sit in restaurants sometimes, and we see the couple that the girl's crying, you know, and you start to fill in the blanks like, oh, he did something, he's cheating with her sister, but like you do all that speculation. And honestly, I agree very much that stories come from characters at some point, and the idea at other times. So I would just say I don't think people are born to be writers. I think some people are born with the vision of what's a complex, interesting situation. Tommy.
Was that a question?
No, I was trying to.
Yes, no, very good, very good. No, I just want to add a little one little thing to your previous question, and that was that about Joe Speedboat, for instance. I mean, it is, as some critics noted, it is quite a ridiculous title if you want to make it look literary. So it was a big risk to call a novel Joe Speedboat. But then again, I thought of every possible title, like, for instance, The Lesser God. That would be a very literary title, but then again, it wouldn't fit this book. So I had to give it this title because it all started with the name Joe Speedboat, which was a name I heard when I was about 18 and in college in Groningen, in the north of the Netherlands. And somebody told me that he knew somebody who renamed himself Joe Speedboat when he was 14. And at the time I thought it was a funny anecdote, but almost 18 years later, and that's how memory works. It works with pop-ups. Suddenly this name Joe Speedboat popped up when I was looking for a new novel to write, and I thought, well, that's quite endearing to call yourself Joe Speedboat if you're actually called Hans Maarten van der Veen or something, whatever. And suddenly you go in hiding behind that name Joe Speedboat, this shiny facade. And I just, actually, that's how the book started. I just started to think about everything or anything a Joe Speedboat could be. And really the novel evolved from that. It's this expanded thinking about the possibilities of a name, just a name. I mean, it was like an atom which held gigantic power in it. Alina?
Yes, answering to the question about characters and plots and which comes first. For me, writing is like watching a movie, actually a movie produced by somebody out there. And it's a big privilege because I'm the only person to watch this movie, and then I have the chance to write it down. And for me, it's always about characters. I sort of follow the characters and watch their story and listen to it. Sometimes I had great ideas about really great plots, and then I try to develop something, but it never works without characters. And for me, really good books are always about people. This is the only thing I'm interested in, and I suppose some of you too. Just about people and their feelings and how they try to find their own way.
Okay.
I have a question for the audience. Do you still write letters to each other if you're in love? Or do you send text? Or do you spam on Facebook? What do you do to... Do you write letters? You wrote poems? Oh, that's very daring to say here. And did you convince her or him? Him? Her, you convinced her. Very good. Well done. That was a good poem, man. I might borrow it from you. So but that's because that's what it all started with, about the idea of having some power over your life, and actually when I was very young and I was, of course, hoe zeg je dat, Mireille, verlegen? shy. I was shy. And in writing, I wasn't so shy, and I could really convince a girl to look at me. Because of words on paper. I mean, that gave it a very, very big power to it. So well done, man.
So Tommy, you were a very shy, pretty girl.
Yes.
And I guess we only have a couple more minutes, but so I wanted to ask one super quick question of all the panelists. So we have in the book Nothing, we have this idea of, it's called the heap of meaning, right? So to prove that there is meaning in the world, you have to give something up and put it on this heap of meaning. And please tell me if I'm messing this up at all. But is that the basic concept?
Yeah, it is. They're trying to prove to Pierre Anton, that there's meaning
Yeah.
by building a heap of meaning in an old or abandoned sawmill. And there they each have to give an item. And it starts very innocently,
Yeah.
with sandals. It's a favorite item. The guy who plays soccer has to give his football and so on. And gradually, because the one who's just given up an item can point to the next, what they have to give up, it becomes stronger and stronger. The question.
Well, here's my question is, and we'll try to do this quickly. So it's something super meaningful that you would have to give up to the heap of meaning. So I'm wondering what each one of you guys would give up for the heap of meaning. What means so much, and it'd be hard to put it on the heap of meaning. I think Tommy thinks this is a dumb question, but
Well, but maybe I should give some examples of
Yeah,
what the
that's
kids
a good
have
idea.
to
Yeah.
give. For example, we get to the girl whose little brother died some years back. She has to give his coffin. The kids have to go, to the churchyard in the night and dig up the coffin and put it on the heap of meaning.
yeah,
The guy who's the royalist, and they always have the flag up on Sunday, he has to put the flag. The Muslim kid has to give his prayer mat, and of course is beaten up by his father when that is disappeared. And the very Christian boy, he has to give the statue of Jesus from the church, which means of course the kids have to steal it and go in the church in the night. So it's a very strong item. One girl actually has to give her virginity to the heap of meaning. And they're 13, 14 years old. It's so it's becomes very tough.
it's heavy stuff. So
Yeah.
what would you guys say? Can we do this? Do you think we could do this? Or I don't know if this will work out. So let's see if we can do it. What would you give to the heap of meaning?
Couldn't we start at the other end?
Does it, can it, what, I feel like the author should jump in first. So
Okay, yes, that's.
what would you put in the heap
I
of
guess
meaning?
it's fair enough, because since I've talked about it, I have been asked before.
Okay,
Actually,
okay.
readers often end up
so you have a
asking
prepared
me.
answer.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not prepared. But what I've come to is that I would actually put this book on the heap
Oh,
of
nice.
meaning,
Excellent.
because it did come to mean a lot to me.
Okay.
I became so much happier after I wrote it than before. So
Okay.
yeah.
What would you say?
It is. I think it's such a fantastic book, and it did make me think about this. What would somebody
Yeah.
say to you to give up? It's just amazing, and I read the book and I was almost in tears because I thought, well, I would have to give up my daughter.
Wow.
You think,
Ooh.
wow, yeah.
Wow.
Because it was going to that kind of
Yeah,
extent.
that's heavy.
wasn't it?
That's heavy. Tommy, what are you gonna do?
I'm not going to give up my daughter, but there are actually two items which I always carry, which is first my passport and second the little book I scribble my ideas in. I mean, it would be worse if I probably this, because this is much more dear to me than my passport. But these two items are key elements,
Okay.
vital.
Awesome. Are you ready?
Yes, sort of. Well, for me it would be my cell phone. Because I know it sounds a bit amazing, but it's just the connection I keep to my family and the people I love. It would be rather terrible.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is also this is a pen topic, isn't it? Delivering your passport.
Mhm.
Okay. So.
At this point, we want to invite the audience to share questions, comments, ideas. We have microphones, and we're passing them up and down. I heard somebody just go, The beautiful thing about a microphone is, otherwise you have to stand up and talk really loud, but you can kind of even whisper your question in a microphone. So that's why we have them here, so that everyone can hear what you have to say, and so that you can get the answer back that's deserved by the thought that you put into the question. Okay? So, okay. Actually, I'm going to start over here.
David Almond, you write in various different mediums in a graphic novel or picture book, whatever you like to call it. What about poetry? Do any of you write poetry? Do you feel that that's a way of expressing yourself in the private way rather than publishing poetry? Do you just is it a time for you to reflect upon feelings and thoughts and kind of an exercise maybe? I'll just open up to anyone on the panel.
I think some of my shorter books are my kind of attempts to write poetry. They're kind of my excuse for poetry. And the book I've got coming out next year, which is a kind of prequel to Skellig, which is about Mina, who's one of the main characters in Skellig. Mina writes poetry, so it's written by Mina. It's Mina's journals. So through the medium of Mina, I've kind of taken a jump to writing poetry. But it's kind of, and I think we've all been saying this about stories. When you write a story, you become involved in characters, you become involved in the language. We think writing is about self-expression. It's not really. It's about stopping being yourself. It's becoming other. It's becoming possessed by your characters and writing their stories and having their memories and their gifts. And in Mina's book, I write poetry in there. Yeah.
When you write for like teenagers, because all of your, I think all of your books are about teenagers, do you like set yourself in the teenage world, or do you like dumb yourself down to try and like push your like ideas on teenagers? Because because whenever I try and write like for my friends are like, yo, what the hell is this? Like, I'm not even reading this shit, like putting it down. So I was wondering, like, how do you go about like writing books or writing stories to teenagers?
Well, that it might be a funny idea to you, but I actually was a teenager. It might be difficult, and the advantage of being older is that you can either be old or think back of how you were when you were young. So actually I have a few persons in me, which gives me a broader perspective than yours with your capuchon. Which is no, but that's for me. Actually, that there's a Dutch novelist who says that he's 83 now, but his actual age has always been 17. I mean, I'm sorry. His how would you say that? His symbolic age. How would you call that? I mean, what?
The way he sees himself.
Yeah, the way he sees himself. He never turned. Emotionally, he never turned older than 17. So it is. For me, it was very easy to go back into the mind of this young character, because I used to be like that, and I have very strong visions about how it was, and I dream about it. I dream from this perspective. Whereas for you, it might be difficult to dream from the perspective of a 43-year-old man. So that's okay. Somebody else. It's a very good question.
It's all about role playing in a sense. I mean, it's imagining you're somebody else, and it's the same if you imagine you're a very old person or a very young person. It's just the same job. I mean, I write a lot from the perspective of men, both because I like men and because I find it more interesting to write from the perspective of someone who's very different from me. It makes that the role playing much stronger in a sense, so I more become that character than if I wrote something that's very near myself. And and then it is the same if I was thinking, how is it to be 80 years old and not to be able to carry your own groceries anymore, or how is it to be 17 and have to make a lot of choices and not believe that life matters. Wow, it's just going in there and feeling it. And the other thing is, forget about your friends when you write. I mean, really, I don't think I would have become a writer if I had listened to anybody who read what I wrote in the beginning. Even, my parents definitely always told me you can't become a writer, and then they would mention the names of the top Danish writers and say, only these people can write. And I wasn't quite sure what, distinguishing, except that they had made it, and I definitely wouldn't, according to people around me. So yeah, it's good to be a closet writer for I think many years. So at least don't let anybody influence you. Write what you want to write, and go where you want to go with it, and then you see one day. But write what you would like to go and read. I mean, that's the demand that, at least I put on myself as I have to write a book. That's the one book I would want myself to pull out of the library.
I would like to add something to this question. I don't write about teenagers or people of 40 years old. I only write about really very concrete, particular people who I know very well. And they may be different from you or somebody else, but all of you are also very different. I don't like writing about groups, It's always about one person, one concrete person, and her own character and her own story. Not the story of a generation for me.
Sometimes when I read, I catch myself turning into the characters in the novel. So I wondered if, while you guys are writing a novel, do you ever catch yourself acting differently, acting upon the way a character in your novel would act?
Sometimes you have to do the research. Like I had one character who he dated all these girls, and I felt like I had to do that just to get it right. So you have to go the extra mile as a writer. So.
May I add one thing here? I had this strange experience with Nothing when it come out in France, that a woman wrote me that she had a brother by the name of Pierre Anton. I had chosen that name in Denmark as something that nobody's ever called and would ever be in life. And her name was Pascal Anton, and her brother's name had been then Pierre Anton, with Anton as the last name. And he had died some years back, and he was very nihilistic and not believing that anything mattered in life, and always took her enthusiasm for life away. She felt, and she'd never understood him. And she had done some research, on Google to try to find information about him. And then that's when she had found my book and had read it. And she felt it was totally about him. And later she came when I gave a lecture in France to meet me, and she was sure I had met him. And somewhere this was his story, and it gave her and her mother meaning to his life. And for me, I've never had that experience with any book before. I mean, I still get shivers when I think about it. I'd never met the guy, and of course, and never heard about it, but somewhere I think that's what literature can do. That there are things out there that maybe we don't know about, or maybe it's when you really live yourself into characters that they're just things in life that are certain ways that you find. So, but you have to give yourself to it fully and live it.
It's great you mentioned it, because I also made the experience of people coming to me and telling me I had their story. I just wrote down their personal story, and I never met them before. And it was sort of frightening, actually.
How much of your writing would you say is based on events in your own life? I'll repeat it?
Yeah.
How much of your writing would you say is influenced by the events in your own life?
As little as possible. But when I started off writing, I had nothing else than my autobiography. I had nothing else than the experiences I had. So I started off writing rather autobiographically, and it was only later when very late, when I discovered how to write fiction. I mean, a true story with topics that interest you, aside from your biography. And it was a great relief. It took me 5 years. I didn't write for 5 years because I was thinking about how to write something that was away from my pathology, away from my sickness and my abuse and my everything. I just wanted to have this. Yeah, I had a vision how to do it, but it took me so long to learn. And now I reinvented myself as a fiction writer, and this book, for instance, but also the last three novels, are true works of fiction, with very little of my pathology in it, very little of my all your petty life stories.
Excuse me, what came was a necessary passage, wasn't it? Very valid what you did, and true too. You call it true fiction, what came later. But that passage was very, very true.
Yes.
Also.
Yes, it was a passage, a rite passage. Yes, but I understood that my character, that Tommy Wieringa himself, was actually not big enough to carry an oeuvre. So I needed something else because I am too small for an oeuvre. So I needed fiction to write.
You think so?
No, I'm sure. I was so fed up with myself.
We have time for just 3 more questions. The young lady with the microphone in black and our young lady in blue, and then this gentleman here. Then you'll all have chances to speak with the authors as we do meet and greet, which will happen directly after the event. So, starting with my friend there.
Do you think that the way you write your books, from the diction to even pictures, has an effect on the reader and or the deeper meaning?
So the style.
I think it's all part of, if you have to do it well enough that the reader can feel it and become the characters a part of the universe. And so each book must have, for me at least, its own style and something that grasps the reader. Or it first has to grasp me. I don't know who the reader is in that sense, but you have to feel these persons, and that for me then theme and style and characters, it's all linked. And it's not something I can sit and analyze and say, okay, this book should be written like this because then the reader will think A, B, or C. It's more something like, here it's alive. I think you were talking about energy earlier on, and there's something like, wow, this I can feel, this is for real. Even, it's word and fiction, but it feels real. And I think that's the moment when it feels more real than the reality, what's going on around me. I'm onto something, and I better start writing here. But I think all this thing about style and choice and where, to make the right points, and that for me is, for the teachers afterwards to analyze. I think I would stop writing if I thought about it. If I ever try, I can't write it.
I think that's right. I think if you try and separate out the meaning from the language, from the surroundings, that style is everything coming together. And when you're writing well and the images come well, they do just come like that, don't they? Everything is together. It's not as if you say, I'll hammer in a bit of meaning here, or drop in a bit of dialogue there. It just comes like that. And I think also when it happens like it can happen really fast. You think, that's what it's been for. But to get to that point, it often takes loads of hard work. So tons and tons of hard work to get to the point when suddenly Houdini, Houdini, the great escapologist, who people thought Houdini was a miracle worker, and Houdini said that nobody would believe the amount of effort he made to deceive them. And I think writing is really like that as well. You take huge amounts of energy and effort and painstaking work for people to think, oh gosh, to deceive you, to fool you, trick you.
Have you ever got emotional while you're writing a book?
I think you couldn't write it. I'll tell a little story that in one of my books, I became so much, my main character is about a man who tries to kill his own emotions for a woman whom he can't get and is totally passionate in love with, and she's married. And in that process, he goes really down. He loses it in his life. He's drinking much too much. He can't take care of his job or himself and that. And when I was writing this, I became him so much that I lost my memory. So you can say it's more than just emotional, but it was so strong that I really woke up one day and had no clue where I was or who I was. And slowly I figured it out. You find your notebook and so on. And I called my sister, who came to pick me up and took me to a psychologist. And the psychologist said that I had melded together with my main character, which I guess is evident, but in that moment it wasn't for me. I just didn't really know anything. And it took me a long while to become more like normal, or at least more myself, I should just say, again. And I mean, I was really where I lived up at my sister's place, which was near a beach. I couldn't put on a bathing suit the right way. I mean, I was lost, and it was how my character was. And after that, I tried to learn to be a little more distant, but I still become absolutely emotionally involved. And it's part of what is difficult is when you write about strong things. You have to feel them, and it can be pretty scary. Even if it's not your own life, as you asked me for, but you of course use your own emotions, you use what you know, even if you don't write about events that you know, but you have to feel it.
This is a question for all of you. I know a lot of y'all get involved with the character a lot, and y'all show emotion, like she said. So I just want to know, like, is it kind of hard to let go of a character, like to like have the character die in the book, because there's often there's like a author, the name doesn't come to mind right now, that the author actually has the character die in almost every one of their books, and I'm just wondering, like, is that hard to do, or like to let go of your character? Do you like write like sequels only for yourself in your house or something that you read, like that you read like for your own entertainment? Like, I just want to know.
Maybe about the death of a character. It's really terrible to let a character die. It's a very frightening experience. When I wrote my last book, and I had to do it because the story sort of required it, and I needed lots of time to decide it and really to do it, and then I tried to keep her alive somehow, and but I could not. But the good thing about it is, if you sort of have to kill your characters, you still have the chance to keep them alive in a different way, because you are just the master of your own play, and you can do what you want. And then sometimes you have the dead sort of returning to the living people and live on. I don't know if it's quite clear what I mean, but it's a strange experience.
I actually one time set out in my first book to kill the main character. That was my plan. And as I wrote, I couldn't do it at the end. And it didn't make sense. And then the publisher said that's like marketing suicide. So they supported me not killing him.
I have been prevailed upon for one last quick question. This is the final question before we go to have books signed and to be able to meet and greet our panelists who have been just fantastic. I hand the mic to
Thank you. I just really like to ask you a very simple question, like, how do you define what is a story? Why is it so powerful and important? You know, the reason being that when a tribe or a group loses their story, they lose their identity and they literally cease to exist. So...
You know, I'll start with just this idea that I heard Junot Diaz say one time, where he said, you know, many monsters can't see their own reflection in a mirror, and he said the quickest way to create monsters in the inner cities is to never provide them a reflection of themselves through literature. And I think that's a great idea. So for me, I try to always show characters from the neighborhoods I grew up in, and, you know, hopefully it sort of reflects their lives. So that would be my take.
I like to think of myself as a thief, but I give it back better than it was.
I just think, you know, that again, it has to be alive. And yes, there can be many, many stories I can think I would like to write. I think Alina said also something that sometimes you think this plot could be so interesting. And I've many times started things and written 10 or 20 pages, and then it's not alive enough, and I put it aside, because it's really evident that if I'm not excited when I wake up to sit down and find out what are these guys doing here, what's happening, then nobody else will be, and I'm not getting anywhere. So it has to be so strong that it pulls me in, and I love stories and, you know, people and finding out what happens, but it has to have a life of its own somehow.
I think good stories, I mean, everybody's forever trying to say what good stories are. I think, for me, good story, there's something about a good story that's got some kind of mythic force about it. It's, the story is almost beyond what's being written about. And I think as a reader, and as, you know, and as a writer, I think what I kind of, you know, great aspiration is what Kafka said about a good book. A good book is something that breaks the frozen ice inside you. And I think when you read a book that does that kind of thing to you, you know it's a great book, but it's really hard to define. And you're kind of trying to write a book like that yourself, I think. To do something that doesn't stay at a distance from a reader, but actually goes inside and breaks something, you know, that sets up some kind of disturbance inside. A good disturbance or a bad disturbance.
You have to be a different person you know, when you
Yeah.
read it than
Yeah.
before.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's not even worth the bother.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much for listening to us today. And I guess the next thing is some people have books to be signed or to hang out. Is that the deal?
That's it. I guess first we want to thank you all. Thank you to our panelists for all that they've done for us today.